Welcome back. We can hear Katie Barlow now. She's joining us live outside the Supreme Court. Okay, so there's a lot said about this being a leak, Katie. You have been around the Supreme Court. You know how things go. I don't recall a time when we've heard something about a leak. So the question turns to, who has something to gain from something like this?
Yeah, Jim, I agree with you. I don't recall a time where there has been a leak of an opinion in a pending case in the modern era before the Supreme Court. There is a lot of trust that is held in this institution, in this building that I'm standing right next to, among the justices, their clerks, and the staff who work for the court. They don't have leaks out of this building. That's something that has been true for a long time until tonight. It appears there is an opinion that has been leaked, a draft opinion that would overturn Roe v. Wade. I just want to take you to what's happening and what's been happening here on the plaza for about 30 minutes. This is a spot that is well known for First Amendment activity, free speech on the plaza of the Supreme Court. It has been happening for the last 30 minutes. A few different things are happening. The crowd has gathered behind me. They're kind of pushed up against the barricade. It's mostly those who are upset with tonight's draft opinion that would eviscerate the Supreme Court's 50-year precedent protecting a woman's right to choose. But there are people here on both sides of this issue. Now, there is a loud crowd that has been chanting, "My body, my choice," various chants. There are also people who are silently lighting candles on the other side of this crowd. And there are also people who have taken a seat around the Supreme Court just to take in the historic moment of what has happened tonight. Not only the protest that's happening on the steps of the court, but the historic nature of, as you put it, Jim, the unprecedented leak. But the third thing that's happening is the police officers, the Supreme Court officers, have come out onto the plaza, and in various ways we have seen at least 6 of them come out at one time. They are looking at pieces of paper, sharing information with each other, keeping an eye on the crowd. There were at least a dozen officers out here at one point, and they are obviously coming up with a plan to handle what was likely an unexpected media release this evening that is now requiring them to put up barricades outside the Supreme Court to protect the building as this crowd gathers.
Okay, so again, draft opinion, nothing official here, but let's take the stance that we have a conservative majority on this court now that looked like they were appearing to go in this direction. If this were to pass, for the people at home, this would not make abortion illegal across the country, but it would kick it back to the states, where we've seen all of these restrictions in states like Oklahoma, Texas, Florida.
That's exactly right, Jim. So I want to reiterate, this is a draft opinion. And in fact, justices' votes have been known to change from draft opinions before the final opinion of the court comes out. But what this would do, this is a case about Mississippi's ban on abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Right now in America, people who are pregnant have the right to choose to have an abortion up until about the end of the second trimester. Mississippi's law is well short of that at 15 weeks. And what this decision from the Supreme Court would do is overturn Roe v. Wade, protecting that right to choose to have an abortion up until about 24 weeks, and allow individual states to make the decisions for themselves. And in the draft opinion, it's a 98-page document. It's about 68 pages of substantive opinions before the appendices. It says that this would turn the issue back over to the people to allow them to decide for themselves in the individual states. To your point, all of the states who have been passing laws restricting the right to choose to have an abortion well before the end of that second trimester period. So this decision would technically uphold Mississippi's law and their ban at 15 weeks and allow states to decide for themselves. Now, the question after that is, well, what about 14 weeks? What about 10 weeks? What about 6 weeks? And we've seen those cases already come out of states where they've passed abortion bans after 6 weeks. So that will be what comes next after this opinion comes down. But again, I want to reiterate, tonight's leaked document is a draft.
6 weeks, and then even in the case of Ohio, there was a state lawmaker there who was very adamant that there not be any exceptions for rape, incest, health of the mother, which has been the case in some of these other states. So, look, we're talking about the states, Katie. We're here in the district. We're here in Washington, D.C., not a state. So what does that mean for abortion rights in the District of Columbia?
Yeah, the D.C. will potentially be able to decide for itself. It's under the federal regime, so it's going to depend on exactly what is said and how that law plays out. What's also interesting is Maryland has been having this conversation as well, where lawmakers and advocates wanted to enshrine in the Maryland Constitution the right to choose to have an abortion. Abortion rights have been protected in the state of Maryland for a long time now, but advocates wanted to go even further, making sure that it's enshrined in the law so that decisions like this couldn't one day change the understanding of the law in the state of Maryland. But look, this is going to be a conversation across our nation about every state is going to have to decide for themselves if this decision were to come down as it's drafted, which is not a given. Every state would then decide for themselves where that line is. Now, the Supreme Court would also potentially weigh in on lines that are shorter or come short of that 15-week ban that we're seeing out of the Mississippi case right now. That all comes after this decision, which is already drawing this crowd, already drawing this pushback. And the next question is what happens across the street at Capitol Hill. You've talked a lot about this on the Final Five. Congressmen, senators, and the White House have weighed in on reforming the court, possible court reform ideas like expanding the court or limited terms for justices, maybe 18 years instead of lifetime appointments. This conversation is certainly going to pick back up again now that this opinion draft has leaked.
It certainly seems symbolic, too, Katie, because the last Supreme Court vacancy that former President Trump filled was that of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it seemed as though President Trump, the name of Amy Coney Barrett had been on the lips of Supreme Court observers. It seemed like it was going to be a done deal that she would eventually find her way onto the court. And by that appointment and by that confirmation, that sort of solidified the idea that the court was going to take this up, that they were going to at some point weigh in. And I guess many people didn't assume it would be as soon as it was.
Yeah, that's right, Jim. And the fact that the Supreme Court decided to take this case and hear this case was an indication that the justices had something to say on this matter. The Supreme Court had not chosen to weigh in on abortion while Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was on the bench in the last few years. This is something they decided to do after Justice Amy Coney Barrett replaced Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the bench. Perhaps there was some thinking that Chief Justice John Roberts would not be a vote to overturn or to curtail Roe, and that dynamic perhaps shifted when Justice Barrett replaced Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Especially with Justice Roberts, who, after the departure of Justice Kennedy, really became the de facto swing vote on this court. He was a guy who was put there by former President Bush. He was appointed originally. And Katie, I'm trying to go through my legal remembrance of this. He was appointed to succeed Sandra Day O'Connor. Then Justice Rehnquist died, so then he became Chief Justice. But he was sort of put in that position where he wasn't so much an ideologue as Samuel Alito was expected to be when he was appointed and confirmed to the court, also a President Bush appointee.
Yeah, you've got your court history right there about the role that the chief has played from his appointment on, and he cares a lot about the institution of the court, and the court overturning a 50-year precedent would certainly be a remarkable moment for the institution of the court. CNN was reporting earlier this evening that the Chief Justice would not be a vote to overturn Roe v. Wade, but would perhaps be a vote to uphold Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban. It's interesting to see a leak again coming out of the court this quickly. It's something to watch tomorrow. Of course, we'll be covering this tomorrow morning. But as you pointed out, both President Bush appointees on the court, Chief Justice John Roberts and the author of this draft opinion, Justice Samuel Alito, kind of at the epicenter of what's happening here tonight. And you mentioned Chief Justice John Roberts as the swing vote at one point. That lasted for a brief moment in time because once Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined the bench, Justice Brett Kavanaugh really became the swing vote or the central vote, the one that you needed to get in order to have a majority in most cases.
All right, Katie, thank you so much. I know this is far from over and done with. We want to tell people at home, Katie's going to be back tomorrow night at 6:30 right here on Fox 5 for a special live edition of her new show, In the Courts. It'll be at 6:30 tomorrow. Katie's going to have everything you need to know about what happened today and what could happen down the road. So Katie Barlow outside of the Supreme Court. Katie, thank you so much.